Okay, so today we're going to be looking at these two ideas that honestly kind of sound the same to me when I first heard about them: academic self-concept and self-efficacy. But I guess researchers have been looking at them for a while now, right? Like trying to figure out if they're really different or if they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting because when you look at how we see ourselves as learners and how confident we feel when we're trying to learn new things or do certain tasks in school, understanding the differences can be really insightful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's what we're going to try to do in this deep dive, right? We read this paper called Academic Self-Concept and Self-Efficacy. How different are they really? By Mimi Bong and Einar M. Skalvik. And we're going to break it all down. Hopefully it'll be clear and concise and immediately useful, because I know our listeners are, busy people. They want us to learn things quickly and thoroughly. So no BS. We want to understand, how we see our abilities and potential. Okay, so let's just jump right in. What is academic self-concept? Like, can we start with that?
Sure. So you can think of academic self-concept as like your overall picture of yourself as a student. It's really a collection of all your beliefs and feelings that you have about yourself and about your competence, like your abilities in school situations. It's kind of like asking yourself, how good am I at school or how well am I doing? And there's been a lot of research on self-concept in general. Rosenberg, he talked about it as like the totality of everything you think and feel about yourself. And then you've got Shavelson, Hubner, and Stanton, and they really broke it down,
Mm.
defined it as how you see yourself as a person. And what's really cool about their definition is it's not just a random bunch of thoughts, it's organized, like different subjects, skills, things like that. And it's also multifaceted, meaning like you might be good at some things and not so good at others. And it's hierarchical too. So the more general ideas about how you see yourself academically are at the top. And then it's pretty stable over time. It develops as you learn and grow, and it's evaluative. I mean, you're making judgments about yourself.
Yeah.
And it's also differentiable, meaning you can see a difference between, say, your academic abilities and other parts of yourself.
So it's kind of like a self-portrait or something, and I'm always working on it, adding details as I learn. But where do I get the inspiration for this portrait? Like, what actually shapes it? What shapes my academic self-concept?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. And a lot of it really does come from, well, your experiences, right? When you do well in something, that's like adding a nice, a positive stroke to your self-portrait. And of course, negative experiences can also make a difference. So that's what we mean by like environmental reinforcements. The feedback you get, and also what other people, like your significant others, what they think also matters. So your teachers, your parents, friends, like they're giving you feedback on your self-portrait. And Skelvick, he talks about these frames of reference. It's like you're always kind of comparing yourself to something, some standard. And a lot of times that means comparing yourself to other people, right? Like, how am I doing compared to them? That's social comparison. And then there are causal attributions, like, the reasons you give yourself for why you succeeded or failed. Like, did you get that good grade because you're smart or because the test was easy? And these attributions, they can really shape how you see yourself. Spelovic also talks about these things called reflected appraisals, which is basically the idea that we see ourselves in part through other people's eyes. Like, if people think you're good at something, you're more likely to believe it yourself. He even says that actually doing things successfully, like those mastery experiences, those are super important for self-concept, just like they are for self-efficacy, actually. And then there's psychological centrality. We tend to value our abilities more in areas we find personally important.
Okay, that makes sense. So if I really care about writing and someone gives me good feedback on an essay, that's going to have a bigger impact on my self-concept than, like, getting a good grade in gym class, which, I don't really care about that much. So, okay, now let's switch gears a bit. What about this academic self-efficacy thing? How is that different from this whole self-concept picture we've been talking about?
So academic self-efficacy is, well, it's more about your belief in your ability to handle specific tasks in school successfully. So it's not about your overall view of yourself as a student. It's more like, can I do this particular thing? So, he says it's your conviction that you can do those tasks at certain levels. It's that can-do attitude, really. And Bandura, who's really, the big name in self-efficacy research, he described it as believing you can organize and do the things you need to do to reach your goals. And what's interesting is he says these beliefs, they affect a lot of things, like what you choose to do, how much effort you put in, how long you stick with something when it's hard, your resilience, how you think, how stressed you get, and basically what you achieve in the end.
So if self-concept is like, I'm a capable student, self-efficacy is more like, I can nail this presentation or I can figure out this tough math problem. It's that feeling of, yeah, I can handle this.
Yeah, That's a good way to put it. It's much more specific to the situation. So, for example, you could have a pretty good, positive academic self-concept overall, but you might still feel unsure of yourself when you have to do like a really hard statistics problem. So just because you generally believe you're capable doesn't mean you'll feel confident in every single situation.
Okay, I see. So they're not the same thing. But in the paper we read, they talked about how they do overlap a little bit, right? Like, what are the main similarities between self-concept and self-efficacy?
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest similarity is, like we've been saying, it's all about believing you can do it, right? You have to see yourself as capable in those academic areas. Both self-concept and self-efficacy, they stem from that. Bung and Skalvik, they even say that sometimes when you get down to really specific tasks, it can be tough to tell the difference between them. There's some research that suggests that if you just look at the cognitive part, like just your beliefs about your ability, self-concept and self-efficacy can be almost the same.
Really? So just thinking, I'm good at math versus I can solve this specific math problem, they could be coming from a similar place. Interesting. What else do they have in common?
They also kind of rely on the same information to develop. Remember the self-portrait idea? Well, both self-concept and self-efficacy, they're influenced by those past successes, the mastery experiences, how you compare yourself to others, and what those important people in your life, what they think about you. So those are the things that kind of like feed into both your overall view of yourself as a learner and your confidence for specific tasks.
Right. So if I've done well on similar tasks in the past, that's going to make me feel good about my abilities in that subject and make me feel more confident about the next task.
Exactly. And another thing is that both self-concept and self-efficacy, they're domain specific, meaning they're about academic stuff, not like, how good you are at sports or something. And they're multidimensional. You can have different levels in different subjects. Like you might feel really good about math, but not so good about English. And lastly, both concepts can kind of predict how motivated you are, how anxious you get about schoolwork, and how well you do. But we'll talk about that more later. They might make slightly different predictions, actually.
Got it. So there are definitely some similarities in what they are based on and what they can tell us about a student. But let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about what makes them really different. So what's the first big difference between self-concept and self-efficacy?
So one big difference is how thinking and feeling are kind of woven together. When we talk about academic self-concept, it often includes not just what you think about your abilities, but also how you feel about them. Like, do you enjoy the subject? Are you happy with how well you're doing? You might see questions on a survey like, I enjoy doing science assignments. That's tapping into your feelings, which is a part of your self-concept.
Oh, so it's not just, am I good at science? It's also, do I actually like doing science?
Yeah.
Well, makes sense. What about self-efficacy? Does it have feelings built into it too?
Not really. Academic self-efficacy, it's much more focused on that thought, that judgment of can I do this, without necessarily looking at how you feel about doing it. However, Bandura's theory, it does say that your self-efficacy beliefs will definitely influence your motivation and your emotions. So like if you believe you can do something, you're more likely to be motivated and less anxious, right? But the main measurement, the focus, is on that thought, on the belief in your ability.
Okay, so self-concept is like this mix of thoughts and feelings about my abilities, and self-efficacy is more about my confidence, like a pure thought. Can I do this?
That's a big difference. What else is different?
Another big one is how you judge your competence. Is it by comparing yourself to others, or is it about reaching a specific goal? So academic self-concept, it's heavily influenced by, social comparison. It's like thinking about how your abilities stack up against your classmates. Like you might see a question like, compared to others in my grade, I'm good at writing. And it also involves comparing yourself internally, like how you see your strengths in one subject versus another. This is where that big fish, little pond thing comes in. So if you're a really good student in a class with other really good students, your self-concept might be a bit lower than if you were that same student in a class where everyone else is struggling a bit more. And like we talked about, those reflected appraisals, what you think others think about your abilities, those play a role too. So I'm always comparing myself, basically, to others and to myself in different subjects.
Okay, so how is self-efficacy different then?
Self-efficacy, it's mainly about reaching a specific goal. You judge yourself based on that. It's like, how sure am I that I can solve these 10 algebra problems correctly? That's a clear goal. Now, knowing how other people are doing, that might sometimes come into play, especially when you're first learning something. But your own experiences, your past successes and failures, those are much more important. It's about believing you can reach that specific goal, not how you measure up to others.
Right. So if I'm trying to learn a new software program, my self-efficacy is about whether I can figure it out, not whether I'm learning it faster than my friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about your ability to meet that standard. Now, another difference is how general or specific the judgment is.
Oh, tell me more about that.
So with academic self-concept, you tend to make these general judgments about your abilities. Like, I'm good at history, it's broad, it doesn't usually get into specifics. Okay, so it's like a summary of how good I think I am at that subject. What about self-efficacy? How specific is that?
Self-efficacy is very specific. It's about your confidence for a particular task in a particular situation. So instead of saying, I'm good at history, a self-efficacy statement would be more like, I'm confident I can write a good essay analyzing the causes of the French Revolution. It's much more targeted. And this specificity, it's really important for understanding and, maybe even changing your self-efficacy.
So self-concept is like the big picture, and self-efficacy is like zooming in on a specific detail.
Got it.
Now, you mentioned before that self-concept is hierarchical and self-efficacy is loosely hierarchical. Can you explain what you mean by that structure?
Sure. Academic self-concept is often seen as like a pyramid. At the bottom, you've got those very specific self-concepts about particular topics within a subject. And those feed into broader self-concepts for each subject, like your math self-concept or your English self-concept. And those might then all contribute to an even more general academic self-concept at the top. Shabelson, he had these models, and Marsh, he built on them. They really emphasized this hierarchical structure. They even suggested that like verbal and math self-concepts, those might be even higher up since they're so important in school.
Okay, so like my belief that I'm good at poetry and my belief that I'm good at grammar, those might both contribute to my overall English self-concept, which then plays a part in my overall academic self-concept.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So how is self-efficacy structured?
Self-efficacy is multidimensional too, meaning you've got different beliefs for different tasks. And there's a loose hierarchy there, yeah. Like, if you generally feel good about your math skills, you're probably going to feel pretty good about specific types of math problems too, right? But it's not as rigid as self-concept. Because self-efficacy is so tied to the specific task and context. Bandura himself, he said we shouldn't think of it as a strict hierarchy. Because even if you're generally confident in an area, a really specific or really challenging task, that might still make you feel less confident. Bong and Stalvik, they also point out this interesting finding. Verbal and math self-concept, they tend to be pretty unrelated, but verbal and math self-efficacy, those are often correlated. So that suggests that how we develop confidence in doing specific tasks might be different from how we form those overall beliefs about our abilities. Maybe because, when we compare ourselves internally across different subjects, that affects self-concept, but not so much self-efficacy.
That's really interesting. So I might see my verbal and math abilities as totally separate, but my confidence in doing a verbal task and a math task, those might be more related. Okay, so what's the next big difference?
The fifth difference is about time. Academic self-concept statements, they often talk about the past or present. Like, I've always been good at science, or history is easy for me right now.
Yeah, I see that. It's about what I've done or how I feel now. What about self-efficacy?
Self-efficacy is almost always about the future. It's, I'm confident I can do this, or I believe I'll be able to learn this. It's about what you believe you'll be able to do.
So self-concept is like looking back, and self-efficacy is looking ahead. Okay, what about how much these beliefs change over time? Isn't that another difference?
Yes, exactly. So academic self-concept, it tends to be pretty stable. It's like that self-portrait, remember? It doesn't change overnight. Research shows it's pretty resistant to change. It takes time and consistent experiences to really shift that deep-seated belief you have about yourself as a learner.
Yeah, it makes sense that it would be harder to change. So what about self-efficacy? How easily does that change?
Self-efficacy, it's more flexible. It can change more easily depending on the task, the situation, and any new information. There have been studies where they've been able to increase someone's self-efficacy for a specific task pretty quickly, like just through good teaching or giving them positive feedback. So it's like your self-concept is this big ship that takes a while to turn, and self-efficacy is a speedboat. It can change direction quickly.
So even if my overall self-concept is not great, if I have to do this new difficult task, I can still work on my self-efficacy for that specific task. It's good to know. Okay, last question about the differences. Do they predict different things?
Yeah, they do, though there is some overlap. So academic self-concept, it's linked to your overall motivation to learn, how anxious you feel about school, and your general academic performance, like your grades and test scores. It kind of sets the tone for your overall experience.
Okay, so it's like the big picture of how I do in school. What about self-efficacy? What does that predict?
Self-efficacy is a good predictor of more specific things, like what tasks you choose to do, how much effort you put in, how you handle setbacks, how well you actually do on those tasks, what goals you set, and what strategies you use to learn. It's all about your active involvement in those learning activities and believing you can do them.
So whether I actually sit down and do that hard problem set is more about my self-efficacy for those specific problems, even if my self-concept for math in general is good. That's really helpful. Now, the paper also talked about how self-efficacy might actually come before self-concept, like it might be the foundation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the idea is that when you succeed at specific tasks early on, that builds your self-efficacy. And over time, all those little successes, they kind of build up and contribute to you developing a more general, stable academic self-concept. It's like each time you succeed and feel good about it, you're adding a brick to the foundation of your belief in yourself. At first, your feelings of competence, they're really specific, just like self-efficacy. But as you keep succeeding, these beliefs can kind of come together and create this broader sense of competence in that subject, and that can then affect how you feel about that subject.
Oh, that's a cool idea. So those little wins, they could build up to this bigger belief that, yeah, I'm good at this. It's encouraging, actually.
Yeah, it is. It suggests that if you focus on building your skills and your confidence in specific areas, that can lead to a more positive self-concept in the long run. It all adds up.
Wow, this has been so helpful. It really clears things up for me. So for our listeners out there, what are the main takeaways? What should we remember about all this for our own learning?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that believing in yourself, both your overall ability and your ability to handle specific tasks, those are both super important for success and for enjoying learning. But since self-efficacy is easier to change in the short term, it gives us some specific things we can do. Like set realistic goals, focus on the process of learning, get feedback, and find examples of people like you who are succeeding. That can really boost your belief in yourself. And pay attention to how your effort makes a difference. And take time to think about how you're doing and where you've improved. There's a lot of research on self-efficacy, like by Shunk, that gives us all sorts of practical advice.
Yeah, those are great tips. I can definitely use those. What about self-concept? Since it's harder to change, is there anything we can do about that?
Since self-concept is more stable and a lot of it is about comparing ourselves to others, I think the focus should be on creating learning environments, both for yourself and for other people, that are less about competition. Less about being better than someone else. It should be more about personal growth and mastering skills.
So instead of worrying about my grade compared to everyone else, I should think about my own progress and whether I'm reaching my own goals.
Exactly. And remember, when you work on building your self-efficacy in specific areas, you're not only improving your performance, you're also potentially building a more positive self-concept in the long run. All those small wins matter.
This has been such a good conversation. So basically, academic self-concept is our big picture view of ourselves as learners, shaped by our experiences and how we compare ourselves to others. And academic self-efficacy is about our confidence in our ability to do specific tasks, which is easier to change and affects how motivated and engaged we are. Understanding the difference can really make a difference in how we approach learning.
Absolutely. And here's something to think about. Think of a skill you're trying to learn or something you want to get better at. Instead of judging your overall ability in that area, what if you focused on building your self-efficacy for each small task involved, like breaking it down into smaller, manageable steps? How do you think that would affect your progress and how you see yourself in that area? It's about shifting your focus from the big picture to those specific things you can do.
That's something I'm going to keep in mind for sure. Makes a lot of sense. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into academic self-concept and self-efficacy. It's given me a lot to think about. And until next time, keep learning and keep believing in yourselves.